Just to kind of get us started here, I just wanted to let you know about our website, evangelistdaveyoung.com. And there's our email. It's dave@evangelistdaveyoung. Reach out to us if you'd like to follow our ministry as far as get our newsletter that comes out at least quarterly or sometimes monthly, and even occasionally more often than that. You can just go to that website and sign up for it. We'd love for you to do that. And, of course, Pastor's already been advertising our podcast, but if you've never listened to it, we'd love to have you join us at the Keeping It Young podcast. And just to kind of give you an idea of our family, there's the whole Young clan, and all of them together. Abby's over here, married to David. They're on staff at West Coast Baptist College in Lancaster, California. Jake's right there beside of Abby. He's our 19-year-old. He's studying for ministry, but sitting out a semester. Of course, Charity's here. Y'all know Charity, and there's Bethlie and me. And then my son Joshua's youth pastor in Camarillo. That's his wife Bethany. And over here on the end is our son Matthew and his wife Kareth, and they're the ones that are in Alabama. So that's the whole Young clan. We always wanted 10 children, and we're counting the in-laws, so we're getting close. And give us 2 more married. Charity, you got to get thinking about this. And give us 2 more married there, and we'll have them all. This is our favorite. I just at least thought you ought to see this. And that's our favorite. Man, doesn't that just encourage your heart? And that's our Ellie Joy and all of her beautiful smiles. And we are so blessed. I love being a grandpa. And I know you all that are grandparents identify, don't you? Doesn't she just look good? I should just leave it up the entire service, shouldn't I? And that would so distract you all. Here's a question for you. What is the most important word in raising children? You ever answered that question? What word would you choose? What is the most important word in raising children? How would you answer that? Love. That's a good word. How else would you answer that? Patience. And no, that's a good word. No. How many of y'all like that word? No. Love, patience, no. Any other want to take a guess at it? What's the most important word in raising children? Discipline. That's good. Wisdom, obedience. These are all great words. What is it? Training. Now that's a really good word. That's the word I'm choosing tonight. Somebody said in one of my conferences, God. I said, well, how do you argue with that? Yes, sir. The word. Yeah, those are all good. The most important word in raising our children may be found here in Proverbs 22 in the 6th verse. You know this verse? It says, train up a child in the way he should go. When he is old, he will not depart from it. How many of y'all agree that one of life's greatest blessings is being a parent? Do y'all believe that? How many parents do we have in the room? Just out of curiosity. Don't you love being a dad or a mom? Isn't it great? It's a wonderful thing to have children. Succeeding as a parent is undoubtedly one of life's greatest blessings and accomplishments. And struggling as a parent can be one of life's greatest heartbreaks. You know that, I know that, we're all aware of that. God inspired Solomon to write this verse to help us succeed. It's an incredible verse for families. If you have a family, Proverbs 22:6 is an incredible verse. Oddly enough, it is also a debated verse. Are you all aware of that? This verse is so debated. I've just kept a list of things I've heard about this verse. Here's some of them. I heard someone say, obviously this verse doesn't apply to everybody. Now, why would you say something like that? Well, because sometimes we struggle in the family. Say, we sure tried, but the family's not well. So this verse may not work across the board. Someone else said, well, really, they said, this is a principle, it's not a promise. Well, there may be some validity to that. Someone else said, no, the Proverbs are all probabilities, they're not promises. I've heard that one. That's a tricky one for me. Because we will take Proverbs 22:6 and say, well, you know, it's just the Proverbs are probabilities, general statements. They're not across the board promises. I struggle with that one because of verses like this. Trust in the Lord with all thine heart. Lean not unto thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he will probably direct thy steps. See, wine is a mocker, strong drink is raging, and whosoever is deceived thereby is probably not wise. No, those are pretty much blanket statements, aren't they? So here's how I like to address this passage. I like to address this verse, Proverbs 22:6, with one word, and the word I would address it with is the word truth. How many of y'all believe the Bible is true? Do y'all believe that? So whatever Proverbs 22:6 says, here's the best way to think about it. Brothers and sisters, it's true. So whatever it means, whatever it says, it's truth. And it's a truth given to us by God to help us to raise our children. So let's learn from it. And let's start here tonight. Think about three things just to kind of get us started. To understand Proverbs 22:6, you have to recognize to whom it is not written. All right? Now, how many of you know that children can grow up and make decisions they ought not to make? How many of y'all know that? Are y'all with me on that? How many of y'all know that when your children grow up, they have a free will? How many of y'all know that? And how many of y'all know that when your children grow up, they have a sin nature? How many of y'all know that? And so it's no surprise, is it? You would agree with this one. It's no surprise that our children grow up with a sin nature, a free will, and frequently can make decisions that we disagree with, or in fact, that they ought not to make. Would y'all agree with that? In other words, families can struggle. This verse, however, is not written to families whose children are grown and struggling. Now, we've got to say that, brothers and sisters, because if you're not careful, you can undermine God's plan for raising children if you take this verse and find it discouraging because your children are grown and aren't what you want them to be. This is not your verse if your kids are grown and aren't well. There are other verses about that. What do you do if your children are grown but aren't well? There's at least three things every parent ought to do. If your children are older but not well, there's three things you ought to do. Number one, you ought to pray up a storm because God answers prayer. How many of y'all believe that? So it's always right to pray, isn't it? Somebody says, I've prayed a long time for my son or daughter. Now remember this, God never forces His creation to act against their will. He doesn't do that. But here's what God will do. When you are praying, mark this down in black, and underline it in red. When you're praying, God is working. I want to say that again. When you're praying, when you are praying, God is working. You may say, I prayed for 20 years for my son, and he still is not right with God. Listen, don't you stop praying, because if you are praying, the God of heaven hears prayer and goes to work in relation to your praying. You ought to believe that. So don't ever stop praying, because you can mark this down and know it in your heart. It's absolutely biblically true. As you're praying for your son or your daughter, he might be 40 or 30 or 29 or 56 for that matter. If your son or daughter, if they're not well spiritually and you're praying for them, the fingerprints of God are all over their heart. He's knocking. He's working. He's inviting. You may not even realize it, but you may think your son's a mess, but if you weren't praying, his life might be far more messed up than it already is. Because God answers. God works in relation to prayer. So if your children are grown and not well, pray up a storm and don't ever stop praying. Call them out by name every day. When you wake up in the night and it's on your heart, pray about it, pray about it, pray about it, pray big. Aren't you glad God answers prayer? Are y'all with me on that? So just keep praying. Number two, love. Pray, number one. Love, number two. Love up a storm. You say, my son is so disappointing me. My daughter's so disappointing. Listen, love her like God loves us. How many of y'all praise God that when you were a sinner and you didn't deserve it, the God of heaven still loves you? Can I get an amen there? When you were a sinner and you didn't deserve it, the God of heaven still loved you. So your son or daughter may be a disappointment to you, but you love them unconditionally and let them know it. Does God let us know He loves us even when we're sinners? Does He? The Bible says things like this, doesn't it? He reigns on the just and on the unjust. Why does He do that? Because He loves us. Jesus died for us even while we were yet sinners. What's He doing there? Letting us know He loves us. That makes a difference, doesn't it? Aren't you glad God doesn't just love us, He shows us? Aren't you glad for that? I was preaching to junior boys and girls at a camp in Tennessee years ago. And it was Sunday afternoon. They had traveled all night, some of them to get to camp, or all day. And it was 99 degrees outside and 100% humidity. And they've been, junior boys and girls are lively and they got energy and they've been playing outside. And now they come in for the first service into an air-conditioned auditorium and I get to preach to them. And I'm telling you, once you get out of that hot and you get in that cold, your brain starts shutting down. You know what I mean by that? And the junior boys and girls, they're waiting. And I'm trying to keep them with me. So what you do when you speak to junior boys and girls is you get them participating by asking them responsive questions. Now, adults aren't that way. You can say to an adult crowd, what's the most important word in raising children? And sometimes you got to kind of pull it to get them going. Not junior boys and girls. You ask a junior boy and girl a question like that, they will have an opinion and jump in and try to give you an answer. And I was preaching about how God shows us He loves us. And I said to the boys and girls, you know, it's like your dad and mom. If your dad loves your mom, then he's got to show her that, right, boys and girls? Yeah. I said, how can a husband show his wife he loves her? To junior boys and girls. You should have been there. It got on. How can a husband show his wife he loves her? This one little boy from somewhere down south, he said, he could tell her. Say, man, yeah, it's good, son. One little boy said, oh, he could kiss her. Woo. And then I lost the whole crowd. They're all like, One little boy, I'll never forget him. He put his hand up. He didn't even jump around like the other kids. He just confidently, with great authority, with great, just I know what I'm talking about, put his hand up. So I called on him. How can a husband show his wife he loves her? He said, he could buy her some fried chicken. For the life of me, I just thought, wonder where he got that. Reckon his mom has high cholesterol? I mean, there's all kinds of questions went through my mind on that answer. But here's the whole deal. Isn't it right that God shows us He loves us? Do you see where I'm going with that? So is your son grown and still a disappointment? Make sure he knows you love him. You don't have to overlook sin. You don't have to excuse sin. You can be even honest about it. Son, I don't agree with how you're living, but you're my son. Sweetie, I don't agree with you, but you're my daughter, and I love you, and I will never stop loving you. And if there's anything you ever need, I'm the one that'll meet it. That's parenting adult children. You pray for them, you love them, and you talk to them. You talk. Keep the doors of communication open. That's what you do with adult children that aren't well. This is not your verse, but there are things you can do with adult children. Some of you are old enough to have adult children that need that. They need your prayers, they need your love, they need your talk. You know what talking does? Talking keeps the door open. So when they have a birthday, talk to them on their birthday. When Christmas rolls around, talk to them at Christmas. On Easter Sunday, talk to them. When they have a special event that happens, talk to them about it, because by chance they ever decide to return to God, your talking to them may be the bridge that allows them to come back to God. But see, this is not your verse. This is not to whom it's written. Who is this verse written to? This verse is written to those of us who are still raising children. Now, that's some of you. You're not there. You're a little out of the sync on this sermon tonight because you're done. How many of y'all praise God? That's over. You're done, but a lot of you are still raising children, and you need this verse. And here's what it says, all right? The verse says, number one, train. Now, let's talk about this word. The word is train. The verse says, train up a child in the way he should go. If you took this word in your Bible and looked up this word and all the times that it's used, it most often is translated by the word dedicate. In other words, to train your children is to dedicate them. In fact, I found 3 definitions of the word. It means to dedicate, or to aim, or to fence. Now, dedicate is like this. God, this is my son, this is my daughter, and I'm dedicating their training to you. God, I want my children to know you and to love you, and I'm dedicating this to you. I'm dedicating. Train up a child. Dedicate up a child in the way he should go. The word is to aim. How many of y'all know Psalm 127, verse 3? You know that verse? As arrows are in the hand of a mighty man, so are children in their youth. Now, you know this photo. You take a bow, you put an arrow in it, and you pull back the bow, and that's the word train. You are training the arrow in the direction you want it to go. Y'all got this picture? If I'm aiming at the exit sign above the back doors, exiting the auditorium, if I aim at that sign and there comes the day, I'm done, I've done all the training I can do, and I release the child, I'm done, arrows have a tendency to go in the way they're pointed, don't they? That's all the verse is saying. So what have I got to do as a parent? What I've got to do as a parent is when I have a child, you remember we often do this in church, I'm coming today to dedicate my children to the Lord. You ever seen that in the church? That's a practice of this verse. Now what do I do as a parent? I take the next 18, 19, 20 years of their life, and what do? I aim them. I aim them. What do I do when they're 3 years? What do I do to it with a kid in a terrible twos? I start aiming him. You understand that? What do you do when you have a tweenie? Here's what you do with a tweenie. You aim them. What do you do when you have a teenager and they're going through puberty and their emotions are all over the place and now they got an opinion? Well, here's what you do. You aim them. That's the word train. And the third definition is the word fence. Now, I like this definition because I was raised on a farm. If my dad sold steer or a heifer and somebody comes to get it, what we would do is we would fence the heifer in, or we'd fence the steer in. We'd get the heifer, drive the steer out of the field into the corral. And then you close the gate, and the steer's fenced in. He's trained. He's fenced in. And then you get in there, and the farmer comes to buy the steer, and he backs his cattle truck up to the chute. And then you get inside there, and you start driving that steer towards the chute. And there comes a point. What you're doing is you're narrowing the fence. At first, he's running around the field. He's fenced in, but he's got the whole open field. Now you get a little more narrow, and he's in the corral. And now he's in the chute. And the chute is really fenced in on both sides of him. And here's what a steer will try to do. A steer will try not to go forward like your child. Your child has a sin nature. How many of y'all knew that? How many of y'all knew that? Your child has a sin nature. Did y'all know that or not? Your child has a sin nature. And you know what a sin nature does? A sin nature rebels, doesn't it? Just always does. I want my way. Don't tell me what to do. I know better than you do. A sin nature, just buckles down and squeezes its fists and screws up its face and rebels. That's our sin nature. And there's that steer. He's fenced in, but he does not want to go forward in the back of that cattle truck. So he's going to try to go to the left. Here's what he does. Boom. Oh, can't go that way. There's a fence there. He's going to try to go to the right. Boom. Boy, he hits the fence. Sometimes he hits it hard. You think he's going through that fence. Not if it's built right. And then he's going to try to go back. Going back is a problem. You know why? Because my dad's back there. And some farmers have one of those little shock sticks. You ever seen those? That's a good way to get your kids out of bed. Let me tell you right now. I've never done that, just so y'all know. But it'll get you out of bed, I'm sure, wouldn't it? And my dad had maybe a farmer's got a whip back there. And oftentimes a farmer never touches the animal with a whip. What he does is he just pops it. Bam! Our kids were homeschooled, and we were in this one meeting, and there was a guy there doing a teenage or a children's event at this church we were at, and he was a professional, I guess, trick whipper. I don't know what word to use, but he was a whippist or something. He had all these whips, and he could take it. You could hold a $1 bill, and he could take 10 off of it to illustrate the tithe, a tenth of it. Whoop, just take a tenth. You'd hold it in your hand, you boom, right there, and take it right off. He's amazing and he could make that thing go off like a 30-06, boom. And so we bought all of our boys whips and taught them how to do that. And our guys learned how to get out in the church parking lot on recess or during homeschool PE and pop those whips. They could stand, and he taught them to go around the clock. You could stand at attention with a whip in your right arm, and you could go at noon, pow, 1 o'clock, pow, 2 o'clock, and 3 o'clock, and 4 o'clock, and you go all the way around without moving your body. And then he taught them how to be ambidextrous, where you do it with this arm, then switch over here and do it with that arm. And we were in one Christian school in the parking lot, my boys out there playing with their whips, and a neighbor called the police, thought somebody was shooting at the Christian school. That's the truth. That's the truth. So we had to alter our PE class in homeschool. But here's the deal. He's not going to hit that cow, but he's got enough. It's an attention getting. Boom! And next thing you know, that steer has no option. Let's go in the back of that truck. It's the idea of train. Means to dedicate. Means to aim. It means to fence. Let me ask you a question. You that are raising children, what's your aim? You that are raising children, you got a teenager, where do you want him to be when he's 25? You ever thought that way? Or you got a 7-year-old? What do you want that 7-year-old to be at 27? Moms and dads have to train to get them there. You aim them. And here's what God does. God gives us 18, 19, or 20 years. Doesn't the Bible say that an average lifespan is 70 years, except with strength it can be 80 years? You ever read that in Psalm 90, I think it is? Well, if I live to be 80, if my kids live to be 80, God lets me have 1/4 of their life. 1/4 of their life is my responsibility. They live that long. Isn't that interesting to think about? God entrusts most of us with at least 1/5 or 1/4 of our children's lives. The first 1/4 of their life is to parents. And why? Because children have to be trained. It's the most important word in raising children. You have to train them. You have to train. You can love them and not train them. You can take them to church and not train them. You can force them to obey and not train them. You can yell at them and not train them. Training takes about 20 years. It's the most important word in raising children. Are y'all with me so far on the first word? Because there's a second word here in the text. The first thing he says, you got to train them. Secondly, he says, you got to train a child. Now, here's why that's important. It's individual. How many of you have more than one child? Let me see your hand. Most of you do. Many of you do. Pastor has one. And old Micah, so he's only got one. Most of us have more than that. And what you want to find is that every child has strengths and each child has weaknesses. How many of y'all knew that? And they're all individual. If you have more than one child, what you're going to find out is that each child is uniquely designed by God, and you get to train them in the way God designed them. So every child is different. Every child is. And every child has to be taken from where he starts to where he ought to be. It takes about 20 years. You start while they're over here, and you're training every child individually. And they are uniquely individual. How many of y'all knew that? It's true, isn't it? Our first two are Abby and David. And Abby and Josh. Abby's married to David. Abby and Josh are our first two, and they're 14 months apart. Josh was a little bit of a surprise for us. We weren't planning to have them that close together, but God had other plans than we had. And we are happy to have Josh. They're just hysterical. Abby, of course, is a girl. Josh is a guy. They're different. Y'all with me on that? No matter what the world tells you in our culture, girls are not boys and boys are not girls, and girls are girls and boys are boys, and they're different, and God designed it that way on purpose. And so first of all, they're different because one's a girl, one's a boy. Secondly, they're different. Abby was this tiny little petite thing. When she was born, I was almost afraid to hold her because she was so tiny. I thought, I'm going to break her. She's that tiny. Josh was born 14 months later, half grown. He came out and we were like, is he okay? I mean, and is he already playing football? I mean, what's going on here? And because she was so little and he was so big, they started looking like twins pretty fast, and people would say the dumbest things to us. They'd say, oh my goodness, isn't that great? You got a boy and a girl, now you're done. And we'd be like, no, we're going to have 10, just to give people a chance to faint, and catch them off guard. But Abby and Josh were different. Now, here was what was amazing. Abby, her strength was industriousness. My goodness, that kid could get the job done. Her weakness, she was dishonest. I mean, just as dishonest as you could be. Joshua, 14 months later, you know what his strength was? Honesty. You could depend on him. If you wanted to know who did it, ask him. Because he can't lie, just how God made him. He's just going to tell you the truth. It's hilarious. His weakness, he's lazy. Lazy as the day is long. Didn't care if it got done. Didn't care if it got done on time. Abby over here, she's industrious. Come on, we got to get it done. Got to get it done. Come on, help me do the dishes. Come on, we got to clean the house. Come on, let's get it done. Let's get it done. That was her strength, given by God. Her sin-cursed weakness, because she lived in a sin-cursed world, dishonest. What did we have to do as a parent? We had to go to work on Abby. We had to strengthen her spiritual gift. She's industrious. Given by God. That's how God made her. We had to strengthen that. We had to correct her sin-cursed weakness. What do we have to do with Josh? He's not like Abby. He's living on the lazy side. Had to correct that. That was a sin-cursed weakness. He was as honest and dependable as the day is long. Had to strengthen that. You know he's a phenomenal assistant pastor. You know why? Because he's dependable. He's dependable. That was his gift from God. They were so different. So we couldn't raise Abby the same way we raised Josh, and couldn't raise Josh the same way we raised Abby, because they were different. You ever wondered why sometimes in a family you'll have 5 kids, 4 of them love God, serve God, live for God, and 1 is a flat-out rebel? I know there can be many answers to that. Could just be because they grow up with a sin nature and make wrong choices. But sometimes it can also be because one way we can fail as parents is sometimes we can fail one of our children by not correcting their particular sin, curse, weakness, and not strengthening their particular God-given strength. Does that make sense? So I'm not trying to be hard on you older folks. I'm trying to say to you younger folks that are raising children, you got to know your children real well. You got to know them. What is your child's strength? You got to work on that, because that's given by God. Train it, build it, support it. You got to make that a big deal, because God gave them that strength. And you'll say, well, why isn't this son like this son? Because God didn't make him like that son. He's got a different plan for his life. You've got to know each of your children well enough to know this is their strength and this is their weakness. You got to know that and work on that, know that and work on that, know that and work on that. Is this making sense? Josh was hilarious in his honesty. I don't know how many times I've told this story. We were in this one church in Pennsylvania years ago, and I'm not kidding about this. I'm trying to be kind about it, but I'm just telling the truth. It was, out of the 2,000 churches we've been in, it was the weirdest church we'd ever been to. It was just the oddest thing in the world, that church. There were so many things that happened the first service that we were all like, what in the world is going on? Why are they doing it that way? And what's going to happen? We spent the whole morning with our mouth open going, really? What? Well, okay. The other thing about the auditorium was that I like things symmetrical. Y'all know that's the right way to be, right? Did you know that the pulpit was off-centered and nailed to the floor? It was not just off-center a little bit. It was 3 feet off-center. I had high blood pressure the entire week. If I'd have been pastor of that church, I'd have got a chainsaw, cut that baby off, and moved it over. It was the strangest place. The pastor took us out to eat on Sunday afternoon, though, and our family, we had all our kids in there. We sat around this big round table at a really nice restaurant. He treated us so kindly, and we're sitting at this big round table, and the pastor said to my children, hey, young children, what is the weirdest church you guys have ever been to? And would you know it, I have one son who is impeccably honest, and he didn't even stop chewing. He goes, yours? And I was mortified. Beth and I both were like, and I would have kicked him under the table, but if I had him, he would have said, Father, why art thou kicking me under the table? Because that's just how the kid was. The pastor made it worse. You know what the pastor did? The pastor laughs and he goes, no, really, what's the weirdest church you've ever been to? And my Josh assured him, no, really, yours. And I just had to laugh it off. I mean, we didn't get much of an offering that week. And we just kind of laughed that one off. But here's the point. Isn't a point well made? You that are raising children, you got to know them. And you got to study them. And you know, like our Matthew's our strong-willed child. I mean stubborn. He is stubborn. He's as stubborn as his mom. I mean his dad. That was unfair, wasn't it? Just stubborn. I mean, just strong-willed. But you know what we had to do? We had to work hard on that. We weren't trying to break his will, but we were trying to direct it to where that stubborn, strong will would be for righteousness and not for sinfulness. Every child's that way. So what the Bible says is train a child, and then he says this, in the way he should go. Now here's the weird thing about that phrase. In the way he should go is a Hebrew phrase that is almost impossible to translate literally. Because it literally has the idea of in his mouth. So if we were going to translate literally, we'd say something like this. Train up a child in the way of his mouth. That doesn't make any sense, does it? Train up a child in his mouth. In fact, if you look up the phrase, train up a child in the way he should go, and you look that up in the Bible, most often that Hebrew is translated everywhere else in the word mouth. It is the word. But it has this idea. In the way he should go is his mouth, and it has one of 3 meanings. His tastes or her appetites. The beginning, as in the mouth of a cave, or the ending, as in the mouth of a river? You know that the mighty Mississippi, the mouth of the mighty Mississippi, is where it ends as it spills from mainland into the Gulf of Mexico. There's the mouth of the mighty Mississippi. If you're going up in the mountains, you're going into a cave, the cave begins at its mouth. You crawl in through the mouth of the cave. It's the beginning. It has the idea of our children's taste or their appetites. Now think about how powerful that is, brothers and sisters. When God gives us sons and daughters, what He does is He gives them to us where they're small, they're little, they're young. And He gives us 18 or 19 or 20 years in their life to train them individually in their appetites, their taste. So we start at the beginning, at the mouth, the beginning. When do you start training a child? Well, I'd recommend day one. Say, seriously, Brother Young, well, why not? You know, the first time we had devotions with our children was when they were just barely alive, just barely born. Put them in bed at night, feed them, diaper them, swaddle them real good, lay them in their bed. They may be squalling their head off, but you can still have devotions. Just reach down, get their little hands or hold their little body and quote their first memory verse. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. That was our first memory verse. And we said it every day till they could say it out loud themselves. For Abby, it was about 9 months. For Josh, it was 2 years. Primarily because she wouldn't let him talk. People would say to Josh, what's your name? And Abby would say, his name is Josh. And he'd smile. And they'd say, how old are you? And she'd say, he's 1. I mean, the poor kid, it's a wonder he ever talked because his sister wouldn't let him. But here was the whole deal. We started it right away, the mouth, right away. When do you start training a child? When you're changing its diaper and it starts throwing a little temper tantrum. No. Well, you're training. They learn your voices, that daddy is pleased or displeased. See, you're training. Well, what do you do when they're in their terrible twos? You don't throw up your hands and go, well, that's just the way it is. Every child goes through this. No, when they're in their terrible twos, you go to work on them. You go to work. You say, my 2-year-old doesn't behave that way, and if he does, he's going to wish he hadn't. Going to help her not to do that again. We don't behave that way in this house. We don't behave that way in my life. Now, this is a tricky thing. Somebody says, well, how in the world do you do that? Well, you got to train. You got to train. You start while they're young. I'll make it practical in just a moment. We'll call it a night. You got to train. You start. And what's the goal of the mouth? Why does he say this mouth? Train up a child in his mouth. Why? Because you and I are training their appetites. It's an easy thing to train our children to have an appetite for the world. Doesn't the Bible say this? Love not the world, neither the things that are in the world. If any man loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, the pride of life is not of the Father, but is of the world. And watch this. And the world passes away, and the lust thereof. What's he showing us right there? All of our children will live for the world if we let them. But we've got to train their appetite so that their appetite is not drawn to worldly things, but to Christly things. Do you see that? Not earthly things. That's Colossians 3. Do you remember that? Set your affection on things, how, church? Above, not on things on the earth. In other words, you got to train your children. Don't live for this, live for that. We can give our children an appetite for church by making that a priority, can't we? Sometimes in our generation, people give their children an appetite for athletics, but fail to give them an appetite for Christianity. That'll cost our children the rest of their life, because now God will have to do a miracle in their life to get them back on the right track, because we failed when they were younger to help them get the right appetite for that which matters. Now, I praise God that God is able to do a miracle and overcome our failure. Aren't you glad for that? When a parent fails, God can always do a miracle to overcome the failure. I thank God for that. But God's plan is not to have to do the miracle. God's plan is that I give my child an appetite for that which is right. Think about you that are raising children. Do your children have an appetite for Christianity? For the Bible? For church? For Christian music? have an appetite for worship? Do they have an appetite for righteousness? In our world of social media, nonstop, 800 TV channels, if we're not wise as Christian parents, the world can take over our parenting and give our children an appetite for things that have no value. Things like work has value, doesn't it? Give your kids an appetite for work. I will tell you, moms and dads, there are some things a young person cannot learn apart from work. Common sense being one of those. It is shocking to me that sometimes even in Christianity, we can have a child graduate from high school who's never worked, never cleaned a bathroom, never cleaned a toilet, doesn't know how to cook, doesn't know how to drive, doesn't know how to handle finances. You know what that's called in parenting? A failure. Now, we're in a busy world, so it takes a lot of time to say, all right, son, today I'm going to teach you how to drive. Today I'm going to teach you how to handle your finances. To say to your daughter, come on in here, because I'm going to teach you how to make biscuits. We can be hard on this generation, can't we? These kids can't even drive a standard. These kids don't even know how to cook. Well, the fact of the matter is, it's not their fault. It's our fault. Because nobody learns how to cook by accident. Somebody has to train you. You don't learn how to work by accident. Somebody's got to, and you say, yeah, but we don't live like, back then they had farms. Okay, we may not have farms, but aren't there dishes to be done? Well, let the kids do them. Aren't there beds to be made? Let the kids make them. Isn't there laundry to be done? You say, yes, but my children don't fold the laundry right. Listen, moms and dads, get over it. Let them do the best they can, and if you have to, after they go to bed and they're asleep, get up and refold it if it drives you that crazy. But see, let them work. Let them work. Your kid can mow the yard. Your kid can do the dishes. Your kids can clean the house. Your kids can put a wax job on the car. Your kids can vacuum the floor. Your kids have, we got to give our kids an appetite for respect and an appetite for purity. We've got to train, or we fail this generation. Am I making any sense tonight or not? You got to train up a child in the way he should go. And we've got to be good at that. It's in their mouth. And it has the idea of the beginning. And the point of training is that the goal is the end. Whatever I want my child to be when they're in their 20s or 30s or 40s or 50s, or the day they die, I've got to be doing everything in my power right now to train them to get there. See, the devil knows that training matters, so he'll get you too busy to train. What does the Bible say? A child left to himself. What does he do? He brings shame. Why? Because he's not trained. That's the whole point. He's not trained. You ever go to Walmart? You ever go to Walmart and see a child out of control? Has that ever happened to you? I always love going to Walmart with my dad, because my dad's as redneck as the day is long, and I hope you're okay with that. You don't judge people by the color of their neck. And so my dad's a redneck, okay? Now, my dad would go to Walmart and see a kid out of control, and he'd say this. I'll tell you right now, he'd say, I wish I had 5 minutes with that kid. Anybody have a dad like mine? I wish I had 5 minutes with that kid. Now, I know what dad meant, but I also know he was wrong. You know why he was wrong? Because nobody trains a child to do right in 5 minutes. Sometimes, because Bethlie and I speak on the family all the time, sometimes people don't want to get around us with their children. They're like, keep your kids away from Brother Young. Our kids will be the illustration in next week's sermon. But honestly, that's not how we think. You know why? Because a 3-year-old who's acting up in a church service, but who is being trained, that's okay. See, they still got what, 15 years? He's 3. Give him 15 more years. If you're training, surely in 15 years you can train a child how to sit right in church. Right? So let's give grace to each other, support each other, but don't stop training. And don't think like this, well, they're just 3. Yeah, because how many of y'all know this? Before you know it, they will be 13. Did you know that God's plan for training our children is we do it younger than later? And the reason being is because they're easier to train while they're young. In our front yard right now, we have a crepe myrtle tree that I absolutely love, but I have one problem with it. My crepe myrtle looks like this. I can't do a thing about it. When we moved into there in 2012, it wasn't like that. But I ignored it. And now it's a pretty good sized crepe myrtle tree, and it's leaning. I don't like that. I wish it were just beautiful. But it's not. It's like that right there. Drives me nuts. Now here's the whole point. If I'd have been taking the time when that thing was small, young, to get it growing right, it would now be a mature tree, straight as an arrow. That's the picture God's giving us. All of our kids are not trees. None of our kids are trees. Let me say that differently. But the training principle is the same. A few things I'll tell you as we close tonight. Train up a child in the way he should go. A couple of things you ought to learn from this. So he will go that way. Does it work? Yes or no? Do you believe this works? How many of you ever met somebody and they're like this? They're like, tell you right now, I wouldn't drive a Ford if you paid me to drive it. I'm a Chevy man. Anybody here know something like that? I wouldn't drive a Dodge if you paid me to drive it. I'm a Ford man. What would make some guys feel so strongly about something maybe that's a little on the silly side and all things being equal? Probably because they were trained. You got a dad that said, we don't drive. Like I have a dad that wouldn't drive a John Deere. He believed in Massey Ferguson. Massey Ferguson's the kind of tractor you ought to buy. They're better than John Deere. And even to this day, when I'm with somebody and they're like, you know, John Deere is the tractor you ought to have, my heart says, Massey Ferguson's probably, I don't know why, but my dad said it. See, I was trained, right? How many of y'all like Brussels sprouts? Come on, how many of y'all like Brussels sprouts? How many of y'all don't like Brussels sprouts? You know the difference? Probably training. The difference is probably training. You know why? Because some of you, your mother said, you will eat these, and if you don't, you'll have them for breakfast. And you learn to like them. Am I right or wrong? You learn to like them. And some of us, my mom didn't make me eat Brussels sprouts, so I don't care much for them. Now, I can make myself eat anything now, usually. But the reason I don't like them is because I wasn't trained to like them. I go to the Philippines all the time, and my Filipino friends, we have a college in the Philippines, and I'll go over there sometimes to preach graduation or to do a conference or something. And when I'm in the Philippines, my Filipino friends will say, now, Brother Young, we want you to be an honorary Filipino, so you got to try balut, because if you eat balut, you're an honorary Filipino. You know what a balut is? Yep. It's a duck egg with the baby duckling growing inside it. Let it incubate, let it start growing, and take that duck egg from its mama, and you boil it, and it makes a great meal packed with protein. 1 peso, Filipino peso will buy you at every bus stop. You can buy a full meal, big old duck egg for 1 peso. It's a baby in there. You peel it, you open the top of it, and you drink the fluid out of it. Smells, and then you peel it, and my Filipino friends will eat it, chew it up, the whole baby and everything. And they're like, come on, Brother Dave, come on, Brother Dave. I'm spiritual, so I always say to all my Filipino friends, let me pray about it. The Lord said no. And you can't argue with God. God told me not to eat that, and I am almost positive I literally heard the voice of God. Brothers and sisters, I am not eating that. Y'all with me on that? Now, I got friends that'll try it, but that's because they're not right with God. And they weren't trained well. That's just what that indicates. But here's the whole point. Why in the world would you eat balut? You're trained. You were trained. Like, I don't like General Sherman. I don't like General Sherman. You know why? I was trained. Bad man. He was a bad general. He was a bad man. I don't like General Sherman. Never have liked him. I wouldn't drive a Sherman tank. Wouldn't name my dog Sherman. Because I was taught General Sherman was a bad man. Now, isn't that silly? We can train our kids in all kinds of things that are silly. I was trained, where I grew up, to like the Tennessee Vols. Rocky Top, you'll always be home sweet home to me. I was trained. Now look, don't you think? I know people in this church that are Steelers fans. I read in my Bible, thou shalt not steal. But I know people in this church that are, why would you be a Steelers fan? Because you were trained, probably. I know a pastor's wife who's a Cowboys fan. Now, why would you be a Cowboys fan? Because she was trained. In fact, she said that this week. I was trained. Was it your daddy? My daddy was a Cowboys fan. I'm a Cowboys fan. All I'm trying to say tonight, church, is this. Don't you think if we can succeed in training our kids to be a Steelers fan or a Volunteer fan or a Cowboy fan, to like a Ford over a Chevy or a Chevy over a Ram or a Massey Ferguson over a John Deere or whatever, don't you think we ought to go to work for at least 20 years of our kids' lives to try to train them in that which really matters? That's the plan of God. We want our kids to go that way. And three things and we're done. You want to train your children and give me your attention. Give me your attention. Give me your attention. Train them. Give me your attention. You train obedience and you correct disobedience. That's where you start. You train obedience. You correct disobedience. What's the goal for your little one? The goal for your little one is they give you their attention. When you speak, they respond. When you order, they obey. That's your goal for your little one. It means you have to do a lot of talking and a lot of repeating. You have to say, no, 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 no. You have to say it many times. You have to teach them to obey. How do you stop? How do you do that? How do you say that? What do you say? No, say yes, sir. You're training obedience. And in some areas of disobedience, you can just train them by correcting them. Many times in your children's life, they'll disobey, and you'll have to say, hold on. Is that how is that what you should have said? Okay, you say that again. Repeat after your dad. And teach them how to speak to each other, how to respond. You got to talk all the time. And how do you correct disobedience? There are some things that are big enough that you may have to spank them. Don't let that offend you. You back up 50 years, everybody did it with great success. Back up 50 years, everybody believed in spankings with great success. You could even spank your child in public and people would applaud you. They'd say things like, good for you. He deserved it. He'll thank you for it someday. They'll say, in fact, people would help your parents to spank you. They would call your parents and say, your child did this and need a spanking. And our parents would be, boy, you're right. They'd hang up the phone and give us a spanking. Why? Because they were trying to correct our disobedience. Not everything's a spanking matter. You know that, don't you? But some things in your child's life may require a spanking because it is a huge matter. Lying, for instance. Disrespect, for instance. Why does it matter? There are three. Answer this question, all right? We'll be done, I promise, just a moment. Answer this question, okay? Is it a big deal if a 3-year-old lies? I heard a yes. Anybody got a no? I'm going to say no. You know why? They're 3. So what? Doesn't make a big difference. Not like his wife's going to leave him. He's 3. Which is why training is so important. God's plan is that we correct our children at a time in their life when it's not necessarily the biggest deal. Now, I'm not underestimating the sin of lying. I'm just saying the kid is 3. And here's what we do in our culture. Our culture says, well, they're only 3. Well, they're just 13. Well, they're just 16. The point being, you train it while it's not a big deal. Because someday it will be a life-changing matter. See, it's not a big deal. In the grand scheme of life, a 3-year-old told a lie about crayons. That's not like the world is going to fall apart, it's crayons. But that same child, unless I correct that when it's no big deal, can grow up and wind up in jail. End up with his wife leaving him because of his dishonesty. Do you see God's plan here? And the idea is God wants you to even amplify it. What is a spanking matter? A spanking is an amplified consequence of a negative behavior before it's a big deal. Did I say that right? Spanking says, all right, he's only 3, but I got to correct that before he's 23. So right now, while he's 3, I'm going to amplify the consequences of that negative behavior. It's not a big deal right now. He's only 3, but I want to win it right now while it's not that big of a deal, so I don't have to try to win it when he's 23 or 33 or 43. You see what God's plan is? That's why parenting is so important. When a parent has a 4-year-old who is lying through their teeth and a parent says, you lie again and I'm going to spank you, and the child lies again, and a parent, he's not angry, he's not upset, he's training. He says, son, I've tried to get you not to lie, but you, sweetheart, you keep lying, and there's only one, I don't know what else to do except to spank you, because lying can destroy your future and damage your marriage and hurt your family and cost you a job and might even wind you up in prison someday. So right now, while you're 4-year-old and it's not that big of a deal, I'm going to amplify the consequences of that behavior. I'm going to give you a spanking, and that spanking is an amplification of a negative behavior before it's a big deal. Have I said that enough, or can I go on? Are y'all with me on that? And Mom says you got to embrace that. Now somebody says, but the culture we live in is against that. All right, then do whatever you have to do. We homeschooled our children, and we found a pediatrician that supported spankings. We chose a pediatrician to take care of our children's health needs because he was a Christian doctor who supported spankings. If my kids were in a school that was against me spankings, I'd be looking for a different school. Now, so he said, are you really that willing to go? I am willing to go that far because I believe it is that important to train my child while they're young. We've got to be willing in this generation to do whatever we can to train our children, even though the culture may be against us and even though the culture may be wrong. We still have to train a new generation that will make a difference in the years to come. So we got to train them in their attention. Give me your attention, and I know we're done. Give me your heart. I've got to train them in truth and in the gospel. As soon as your kids start learning to obey and you're correcting their disobedience, make sure you're giving them truth, which is why every day we said to our children, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. While we're training them truth because we want their heart to have truth in it. And we train them how to be saved, train them how to be saved. And then the last one is give me your hand. What am I doing to my child? I'm to take them by the hand and train them. Well, what do you do when a kid is 13 years old? You're not done parenting. You're at some of the most important times of their life. Give me your hand. Give me your hand, son. Give me your hand, sweetheart. You're 13. And let us take you through these next 5 or 6 years of your life and prepare you to be an adult. Sweetheart, you're probably going to get married someday, so I'm going to have to teach you how to cook because you're going to have to take care of that man you marry because he's going to want to eat. So let me teach you how to cook, sweetheart. Come on in. I'm cooking lunch. Come on, let me show you how to do it. I'm making Thanksgiving dinner. Come on in. Let me show you how to make a turkey. I'm making biscuits. Come on in. Let me show you how to make biscuits. I'm making cornbread. Come on, let me show you how to make cornbread. Honestly, are we not living in a generation that thinks that's silly? And our kids are winding up in their 20s. They don't know how to make a marriage work or finances work. Brothers and sisters, God's called us to do better than the world we live in. So you train. I said, Dave, I'm busy. Daddy, next time you have a flat tire, it's going to be annoying. It's going to be frustrating. But it's a God-given chance for you to teach. All right, son. Come on, sweetie. Tire's flat. Get out here. This is a jack, and this is where you find it. And while you're there, tell them how bad it is that people who create jacks have never changed a tire. Come on, am I right or wrong? I don't know how in the world they come up with the jacks they put on these new cars. That thing just, it's just crazy. But nonetheless, this is how you got to crank it. And before you crank it, you got to break those lug nuts, and here's how you do it. This is leverage. My van had a flat tire on it some years ago, and I was by myself. It was raining. Got on the side of the road and changed a flat tire in the rain. I mean, it went boom, flat. Picked up a tool on the road, and that tool went right through that tire. It went flat, I mean, instantly. I was on the side of the road, just boom, raining. I was in southern Florida. Changed the tire. Turned around, went down to a tire shop just around the corner there. Said that guy, can you take care of this tire? Yeah, he said, I can plug it. It'll be fine. He plugged that tire for me. He said, now pull your van around here. I'll put it on for you. Oh, I said, no, just throw it in the back of the van. He said, you don't want to do it. Pull it around. Let me put that on for you. I got this. I said, no, just put it in the back of the van. He said, you don't want to drive that spare. I said, I know. I'm not going to drive that spare. I'll take care of it. Just put it in the back of the van. He said, seriously, why do you want to change that yourself? I said, I don't. I got a son, and he's 14 years old, and he's never changed a tire. He goes, oh, let me put that in the back of the truck for you. And he threw it in the back of the van, and I went home, got Jake out, and we learned how to get dirty changing a tire. And see, daddies, you don't have to have an art form in this. You don't have to have a college degree. But you do have to train. Every time you have to check the tire, check the engine, check the oil, check the transmission fluid, it's a chance to train. Every time you're doing laundry, it's a chance to train. Every time you got a responsibility to take care of, it's a chance to train. Let's master the art of training our children. Have I made sense? The Bible says these words, train up a child in the way he should go. When he is old, he'll not depart from it. Training makes a difference. So let's win. We've had a good conference. You've been a gracious audience. I love being around your pastor. Pastor Joel's the biggest encouragement I've ever met in my life. And I just love to be around him. He tells me how amazing I am. I'm not going to argue with a man as wise as he is. And I'm so thankful for him. Bethlie and I appreciate you guys so very much. How do you close a family conference? Well, there's no doubt about it that we all need God's help, don't we? How many of you, nobody here but us, how many of you are still raising children? Let me see your hand. See, don't we need a lot of help with that? A lot of us are still raising. How many of you would say, Dave, I'm done raising, but I sure am concerned about an adult son or daughter of mine? Anybody here like that? Yeah, more than a few of us. Anybody here who would say, hey, Dave, I'm concerned about my grandkids. I've got some real concerns. Anybody like that? So there's family needs all over this room, isn't there? And there's a God in heaven who cares. So here's how I'm going to close my part of this family conference by suggesting tonight that all of us need to pray before Pastor comes to take care of the rest of the service. My wife's going to come to the piano, and she's just going to play just for a few moments. Let's take the time tonight to pray boldly for our adult children, for our grandchildren. Think through what could I do to impact my grandchildren and ask God to help you do it. For those of us that are raising children, just evaluate in your heart briefly and say, God, is there any area where I need to pick it up? Ask God to help you because God is on your side and wants to help you win. He does. And she'll play. Maybe you just want to pray by yourself, or maybe you want to pray with your wife, or you want to maybe pray with a brother or sister in the room. The Bible says, bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. Come on, sweetheart, and choose our hymn. And let's just, while she's even coming, let's bow our heads and evaluate our hearts. Maybe lean over and pray with your spouse. Go ahead. If you want to kneel, you can even leave your seat and come and kneel if you wanted to. But you can pray at your seat. This is a time for prayer about our families, our kids, our grandkids, our children. Bethlie will play a few moments. Pray with somebody out loud if you can while she plays. Pray with somebody out loud if you can.